Hello and welcome to State Scoop's Priorities Podcast. I'm Colin Wood, State Scoop's Editor-in-Chief. This week you'll hear from Doug Robinson, Executive Director of the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, about his organization's annual list of top 10 priorities as determined by a survey of NASCIO's members. But first, here's what's happening this week. Following months of protests from state lawmakers, attorneys general, and civil rights organizations, President Donald Trump signed an executive order last week banning states from enforcing their laws regulating artificial intelligence, potentially setting the stage for widespread legal challenges. The Dallas City Council voted last week to install cameras backed by artificial intelligence on yard waste and trash collection trucks in an effort to combat illegal dumping and improve neighborhood cleanliness. The new system is hoped by officials to provide a more accurate picture of what's happening across the city. New York City officials last week announced the launch of a free digital learning hub for residents of the city's public housing developments. The resources, which are available thanks to a broadband subsidy program called Big Apple Connect, are designed to help residents complete basic tasks like connect to the internet or use digital devices. On Tuesday, NASCIO published its annual list of priorities held by state CIOs. Cybersecurity has topped the list for a decade, and it barely beat out AI last year. But Doug Robinson said that this year, AI took the top spot, and it wasn't even close.
Artificial intelligence has moved into the number one slot, which is the story, I think, for 2026. Not surprising, certainly to any of us that are tracking that, but it's in a very swift ascension to number one. Let's put it that way. So that is the story. Really, is the fact that for at least the first time in the history of 20 years of doing the top 10, we've seen a technology policy and strategy approach that went very, very quickly from not being on the list 3 years ago to being number one. So that's probably the story of the top 10 for 2026. Cybersecurity, 12 straight years of number one, and moves into the number two slot. And it was not close. Last year, it was very close between number two and number one. It was not. The delta was pretty wide. So overwhelming selection is number one, given the number of votes that it got from our state CIOs. I should say we had 51 states and territories vote, which is another remarkable response rate. They see the value in adding their voice to these ballots. And so we have Part A, which is strategy, policy, strategic processes, and then Part B, which is the technology. And that doesn't get a lot of attention, but Part B, artificial intelligence technology, in terms of kind of the question about what the CIOs see they're going to invest in 2026. AI was also number one. So strong alignment between those two. So
yeah, this is something I've been thinking about lately because generative AI has been around for a few years now. To what do you attribute there's been interest since ChatGPT opened to the public, but I feel in the last 6 months the interest has really accelerated. Do you have any insight into why that is at least in state IT offices?
I think a number of kind of interrelated activities, but I think for the most part, it's the broad adoption outside of pilots. So we've moved, and even broadening the pilot adoption within the agencies. So it's out there, in line of business agencies. We've seen a number of states that expanded that to broader constituencies. And then we've also seen the actual production level. So if you look at the data that we put out 6 months ago, we had 90% of the states reporting that they had pilots and proofs of concept. They've moved quickly into production. So we've seen meaningful beyond, I would call that beyond chatbots and virtual assistants, which is the predominant utilization. So that's been part of it. Obviously, it's embedded in almost every tool now that states are bringing in from their supplier community. So in addition to the collaboration and the document production tools, you now have Gen AI capabilities. It's, we hear that phrase, powered by AI. Well, it's in all those platforms, all those software as a service platforms that states are using. So I think it's been pretty, like you said, pretty widespread, but also the acceleration, comes from that, and the fact that 90+% of the states now have adopted some type of acceptable responsible use policy. They've got a framework. They have task forces. They have a lot of activity. So moving this forward, so that we've seen that in kind of discussions that we have had. So you look at this is clearly we've been talking and actually researching and doing surveys about AI since 2015, 2018. We had reports out about artificial intelligence use, but Gen AI has dramatically accelerated. And you'll think about it came in at number 3 on the 2024 top 10, and it moved immediately. So it wasn't even on the top 10 previously to that in the policy and strategy side. So it goes from not even being on the ballot, so to speak, the published top 10. It's been on our ballot that we present to CIOs for a decade. Artificial intelligence has. I think Gen AI, as you pointed out, moved this. So go from number 3 to number 2 last year in 2025, and then immediately number 1. So we've heard the phrase that's unprecedented, but in the world of the state CIO top 10 and NASCIO, this is the 20th year we've been doing the top 10. This is unprecedented, because many of these topics have been on the list for many years. They stay on the list, but they don't come out of the blue and all of a sudden rocket to number 1.
Do you think this is it's clear? I mean, clearly influential and important technology in many ways. As we're recording this, it's the day after President Donald Trump signed an executive order preempting state AI law enforcement. So this is a big topic. It's in the news all the time. It's clearly important. Do you think this level of attention is warranted? For example, is seeing the number 2 next to the word cybersecurity, is that potentially a mistake? Or do you think CIOs have no problem keeping all these balls in the air?
No, because it's this is the collective view, right? This is the wisdom of the crowds model. Okay. So individual state CIOs may in fact still think cybersecurity or maybe modernization. They may not be influenced by what we would call the hype cycle of AI, right? But it is clearly transformational in terms of a technology that we've seen in the last 20 years. There's no doubt that they see that. Is there some hype around that? Absolutely. Other foundational things need to be addressed, like modernization, cybersecurity, digital services. They're going to have to be addressed. AI is actually supporting all of those, right? So AI is embedded in those conversations. It's just now getting so much attention. And part of that is the legislative and regulatory attention. You had over 1,000 bills introduced 2025 that dealt with AI in state legislative bodies. So they're taking notice of it. They're looking at it from the oversight, the governance standpoint. They're asking from the executive branch. They're saying to the CIOs, you need to have a framework. You need to have an enterprise policy. We're going to create a working group or some type of advisory council to oversee all of this. And we want you to meet and convene and provide governance across the state government executive branch for AI adoption, and particularly generative AI and agentic AI and whatever comes down the path in the next year. So I think it's getting a lot of policy attention, so that I think demands that the CIOs in the states embrace what's going on and certainly respond to legislative demands and the regulatory requirements that they may take on. So I will not make any comments today about the executive order.
Fair enough.
We've issued our.
We can leave that. We can leave that to others. Plenty others have. So, So does NASCIO have a position on the best path forward for states looking to improve what they do with AI? I imagine, I don't know this for a fact, I imagine you have some kind of group where CIOs talk about this. There's
Yes.
also things like the Center for Civic Futures has its AI readiness project, and they recently announced funding for 8 projects, including New Jersey and Maryland, trying to scale up their AI uses. But then there's lots of states that are far behind, or maybe not
Yeah,
far behind, but
Colin, we put that out actually in early 2023. We put out our blueprint, so to speak, which said we basically said here are 12 uh, elements. Here's 12 dimensions of AI that states should consider. So we did that kind of I think that was in December. We put that out, but we had the working group. We still have now we have an emerging AI working group. So we've that's been rechartered after a couple of 3 years and then renamed to get it beyond simply it was a generative AI to begin with. But no, we've already in multiple reports and publications included recommendations for states utilizing Gen AI in terms of our recommendations on the fact that they should again have encourage experimentation and exploration, but also set enterprise policies and have strong governance. That's probably if you look at the major barriers, uh, uh, governance is probably top of the list, along with data quality and remediating data, along with workforce readiness. So you kind of look at what states are doing; they're looking at all those targets. But we have said from day one that states should establish strong governance around AI adoption, and they should have a regulatory framework around around that widespread adoption, because it sets up guardrails and protects privacy and ensures that there will be responsible use by state employees. So you have to have you have to manage those risks and have again that overarching governance is examples in a lot of states in Ohio and Michigan and Massachusetts and others that Washington State, they've all set up those frameworks, data quality. So there's a lot of areas that we've already opined in our research and our studies that they should be working on in terms of look at Massachusetts and what they've done with collaboration and partnerships with the vendor community, what Mississippi has done with the vendor community and with community colleges and setting up a center. So there's lots of examples across the states that they are, kind of articulating their approach, but they are, I guess, fostering collaboration with both the vendor community, but also with higher education. That they're bringing in academic institutions and they're working with them or working with other nonprofits. So we promote, all of that in terms of a good path forward. Be transparent. Be have disclosure about what's going on with your approach. Have meaningful dialogue. We have states that are having open meetings every month with their AI advisory group, and they're talking about what their path forward is going to be, because it's moving very, very quickly. We have new opportunities, but they also represent new challenges and new risks. We have Gen AI generated cyber threats that are extremely difficult for states to deal with. So that's got to be at the top of the list. So a lot of conversation about AI, obviously. So, and it will be this, and it's because it's in the number one slot. So we'll have those conversations, but that doesn't mean that cyber doesn't demand the same type of attention. Cybersecurity is the only topic that has been on the top 10 list for all 20 years. The only one. There's some that are close, but we can go back to 2007. Cyber security was on that list and remains on the list. So that's a persistent opportunity and challenge for the state CIOs. Budget and cost control have been on there as well. That's another story, I think, for 2026 is the fact that it has moved up. And after being off the list for a few years because of the fiscal, conditions, but now you see the CIOs are also seeing that.
Well, this was the next thing I wanted to ask about. Is is this a bad sign that budget is at number three? I'd imagine in better
Well,
times it wouldn't be on the list at all.
let's say it's a realistic sign, that's right.
Okay.
It's the reality of what the states are seeing, and the state CIOs that realize that. So we're seeing, the warning flags are up in terms of revenue shortfalls, or the consensus revenue forecasts are not being met in a number of states. We've got some states that have serious major, billions and billions of dollar deficit already that they're reporting. Where legislative bodies are going to convene. Budget offices are already telling state agencies, we've got the last 6 months of the fiscal year, our revenue projections are behind. We're going to be very conservative. So yeah, it's the fiscal survey of the states from NASBO, in great detail points that out, that it's going to be basically a flat next 6 months, and they're not going to have that. The rainy day funds are going to be tapped in a number of states. So CIOs are hearing that. They're hearing that from agency customers, that we're going to be cut. All we've been told, cut our budget 5% for the last 6 months of the fiscal year. So I think it's just the reality of, early warning of what could certainly take place over the next 6 months. And that includes, things that the states, the devolution of some of these areas like cybersecurity funding, and Medicaid and SNAP, all those things that, from one big beautiful bill, all those things impact the states in 2026 and even more, importantly in 2027. So the states are going to have to find the dollars to backfill those policy decisions, and it may come out of technology spend.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, these things are all interrelated. The workforce is a topic related to AI that continually comes up. If states want to do good things with AI, it certainly helps to have people who are trained in that and know how to do it. And I think I learned at the last NASCIO conference that Washington State implemented a statewide pay reduction, something I forget, this percentage might not be right, but it was like 2% or 4% or something like that. And I'd have to imagine that that can't be helpful for attracting top tier AI talent. So yeah, when you see,
and you understand, I think, that also the financial and business model of the state CIOs predominantly, overwhelmingly, they're in a chargeback, right? They're in a cost recovery mode. So they deliver services to state agencies, and the state agencies are then paying that, right? They're being billed and they're being paid. That's their business model for almost all the CIOs. Well, we've always called this, the CIOs end up in the double dip, because the agency is told to cut 2%, 4%, 5%, whatever the budget office says. The CIOs are told the same thing. So they're being hit by reductions in their cost recovery because the agencies are, but then the CIO is also being told you need to reduce that. And so they get hit from kind of both ends, the own internal activities as well as their cost recovery. So it's often challenging for them to meet those kind of fiscal pressures because of that. They are not the direct recipients of federal funds like the agencies are.
right. Accessibility at number 6. States are trying to comply with Department of Justice deadline for next April. What are you hearing about that?
A long way to go in terms of meeting those requirements. But again, that's, I think, another indicator of the CIO focus is accessibility has been, on the ballot for state CIOs to select for many years. It appeared for the first time in 2025 in the number 10 slot, so it just barely made it on the list. But it moved up quickly again to number 6 because of that immediacy. So it seemed that, they are feeling the sense of urgency there. It is not their responsibility directly. It's the responsibility of the agencies, but obviously they have overarching enterprise responsibility to make that move forward. But these agencies are going to be held accountable. What we saw from our data a few months ago, that only about 50% of the states were felt like they had things under control in terms of meeting that demand. So there has not been a lot of funding provided. We've heard that from our accessibility coordinators, that there hasn't been a lot of funding provided for this, and that it hasn't been a burning platform. It got a sense of urgency, but now it is. So they've been kicking the can down the road for a long time, but now they've got a federal compliance mandate. No one really knows. We don't try to predict the future around NASA. We're kind of prognosticating based on, our member kind of rankings here, but clearly they see that it's something they're going to have to address in the next 6 months. No one knows for sure what the actual compliance action, if any, there's going to be from the Department of Justice. And we got a lot of large locals in their mix too. You think about that, includes hundreds of cities and counties in that mix that are also need to be compliant by April. But I suspect there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done between now and the spring.
Consolidation optimization is at number 9, and cloud services is at number 10. I can remember a time when these were right up there with cybersecurity, if my memory is serving me right. What do you make of the fact that these have sort of slid down the list?
Maturity of just look at that. They were particularly consolidation and infrastructure consolidation and programmatic and services. They were always, high priority for CIOs because, again, they were in some cases given their marching orders by a legislative fiat. We had a number of states where legislation said you will consolidate. We've seen that, even in the last few years, but demanding that they consolidate the executive branch infrastructure as well as their service portfolio, their catalog of services. And I think this just represents the fact that it's still part of the mission, so to speak, but we've just seen a lot of maturity of adoption. So we've seen, where cloud services, 15 years ago was relatively new on the scene. It was now more mature and readily available across all the agencies, whatever. For the most part, states have taken kind of a hybrid cloud model where it's a mix of private cloud services from the CIO as well as then public cloud from all the different providers. But I just see this as a representation of what we've seen before, where it's become part of the standard operating model and it's just become more mature. So it is not as high a priority, again, across the board. That's for some states that aren't consolidated or that have that, it still is. But across the board, it's something they're working on, all the time. And there's some states that are not, they'll remain federated in that model simply because of their financial model, their cultural model, the way they operate, and they're not going to move. But I still think that's a spectrum. We've even seen it in the last 2 years where we've had executive orders on consolidation in the last year that states have said. Governor said you are, the CIO has been directed to consolidate the executive branch infrastructure. We will have one data center. We will move. We'll virtualize this environment. We'll reduce the numbers of servers. We'll optimize our spend, and we want that done in this manner. In some cases, we will then, I call the unification model. We will put all of the IT professionals underneath the purview of the state CIO. They will not be individual agencies in those lines of business. So we're still seeing that, but again, that a lot of states have already made that move. And that's just the sense of having it kind of move down the list. I think consolidation, cloud services came in at number 10 this year. It was right above enterprise architecture. So enterprise architecture almost made the top 10 list this year, was on the cusp of it. I was rooting for enterprise architecture to make the top 10. but
Yeah.
it did not. Missed it just by a vote, I think. So it's very when you get down to like the bottom 4 or 5, some of these are literally one vote apart
Mm.
because it's so it really gets that kind of collapses down there at the bottom. So it's very tight voting in the bottom 4 or 5 right, every year.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I don't make that's what I'm saying. I don't know it sends a message, but it's so close. There's all so close. They're clustered down there at the bottom, and so they're all a priority for some states, right? So, and for others,
Sure.
enterprise architecture is high on the list of what they're we're hearing that the resurrection of architecture as a business discipline that's coming around. So
Mm.
we hope to see them.
Sure. Yep. Still very important. I know it as a enterprise architecture has a special place in your heart. And as for the trend of things kind of sliding down the list with maturity, in a decade we could see AI at number 10, and who knows, quantum computing or whatever at the top of the list. So
I think we're going to see a lot of activity this year around identity and access management
hmm,
for a variety of reasons. But I think because of its intersection with obviously cybersecurity, but from a standpoint of improving the citizen experience, a key aspect of improving digital services is having a robust digital credentials environment for citizens so that they have one digital credential they can do business with across all the agencies. So I think you're going to hear more about that from NASIO this year. We've kind of targeted identity and access management as a key area. So we're going to be having more conversations, more, I guess, more research, more webcasts about what states are doing around identity and access management because of the need to have that and the work that AMBA's doing around mobile driver's license. We're seeing more and more
hmm,
states, now almost 20, that have MDLs. How does that fit in? The work of the Better Identity Coalition, the work of what's going on with verifiable digital credentials and how that fits in. Some states have embraced that approach. So a lot going on, I think, in 2026 around identity and access management and again digital credentials for citizens and how states can promote that kind of as an enterprise. And we don't need 20 different flavors of those for citizens. Very confusing. So states are really going to be focused on that.
yeah, I would predict that as well. I know Utah recently hosted an event related to that. I don't think it was open to media, but yeah, several states, CIOs I've talked to have talked about how this is an important piece of how they imagine organizing technology in their states. And there's also an interesting intersection with concerns that some lawmakers have to do with online safety and kid safety and things like that. At some point, these two worlds could kind of collide in an interesting way. Is there anything else we didn't go over every one of these, and we don't have to? But is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the list, either this top 10, or we didn't talk about there's a for those unfamiliar, NASIO always has a second top 10 list, which is the technologies, applications, and tools. And to some extent, it mirrors the first list. Number one on that
Yeah.
list is AI
Yeah.
tools.
It essentially what the question for the CIOs, they're like, what are you going to invest in? So this is a piece for the marketplace for for the suppliers and the vendors and everybody else out there. And you'll see there's alignment. Obviously, AI is number one for that, but you'll also see the fact that some of those are where they're going to invest their money, like in cloud services and cloud solutions, identity and access management. I think the only thing I'll point out is that we it was simply a decision which was informed by our CIOs. Many of them said, could we just have modernization as opposed to legacy modernization? Because we have modernization in business processes and modernization in, it's not just about the legacy environment. We're doing modernization as a theme across the board. So that is one thing that you'll notice in 2026 is that we dropped we've kind of subsumed legacy environment, legacy systems under the broad modernization category. So that was just a decision we made. And again, there's no the thing about the top 10 is we're modernizing it as we need to do all the time, right, to reflect the environment. So again, this is 20 years of doing this. We have different different phrases and nomenclature we're using to modernize the top 10 to meet the needs of that. So that's one thing I would point out is modernization now is a broader category, but it's still, it's a very high priority for the state CIOs. And in every CIO, public or private sector, I would say this is the being a modern environment, being a modern activity. That is an aspiration of every CIO. We want to be modern, but that it's just a much heavier lift for the states because of the investments they have in the technical debt and these massive transactional based systems can take a while to modernize. But we're seeing that. We're seeing a mainframe as a service growth in the last few years has been pretty substantial. A lot of states, they're running mainframe cycles, but the mainframe is no longer in the state capital in the data center. It's some other state. So that always surprises legislators, but that's a way to deal with the technical debt, to deal with the investment models, to deal with the lack of the talent that is retired, that no longer understand modern programming languages like COBOL 64, right? So that's just the owner, as I talk to legislators, the classic kind of owner-operator model of how states have done things for decades is again eroding, right? The states are no longer owning all of the boxes and wires. They're not writing all of the code. That is the model that has been abandoned to one which is much more agile, flexible, a broker model, having towers of services, and that's just the reality of how the environment has changed, which is good. We're always excited about NASA because change happens all the time, so it keeps us having to learn new things and have new approaches to the way states will be dealing with serving citizens in the future. And certainly, it's going to be a lot of AI, and next in 2026, we're going to see a lot of AI in production. We've highlighted a number of those things already in our reports and our awards, but we're excited about, okay, where does agentic AI go? How are citizens going to use agentic AI to transact a state business? They're going to have their own agents transact all that and navigate the bowels of state government through those business processes. We'll see. Interesting to see how that might develop in the next year. But we're seeing some interesting production of AI already, where you're showing some meaningful savings and kind of removing a lot of the friction in some of those things. So that's great for states. I'm always excited to read some of those projects.
That's it for this episode. The Priorities Podcast is taking a couple weeks off. We'll be back in 2026. You can subscribe to the Priorities Podcast at prioritiespodcast.com. Leave a comment, leave a rating, share on social media, tell your friends. This recording is a production of Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Thanks to Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher for their production work. I'm Colin Wood. Thanks for listening.